Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alyona Getmanchuk. I am director of a Kiev-based New Europe Center think tank, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Our center is delighted to be a partner of today's event. Today we are going to talk about Eastern Partnership and Ukraine's ambitious agenda beyond 2020. With Eastern Partnership Summit approaching, it is important to demonstrate Ukraine's commitment and readiness for more substantial partnership and deeper level of integration with the European Union. The simple fact that all major stakeholders from the Ukrainian side, including Ukrainian government, Ukrainian parliament, both ruling party and opposition, and civil society leaders are participating in today's discussion, I think it's quite telling and provides a clear-cut evidence that the future of Eastern Partnership is being taken seriously in Kiev. Even though Ukraine's relationship with Eastern Partnership from the very beginning can be labeled as it's complicated. We are also happy to welcome participants from the European Union institutions, including European Commissions and European Parliament today. I would say that Ukraine's approach toward Eastern Partnership is quite consistent and has not been changed for years. There should be more differentiation and there should be more security. What we have seen and heard recently from Brussels and EU member states is rather discouraging us, not encouraging. Is European Union really upgrading Eastern Partnership initiative or downgrading it, making it even less ambitious than it was at when Eastern Partnership was launched in Prague back in 2009? Do we need to refresh Eastern Partnership or significantly renew it? Can Eastern Partnership initiative be sustainable and not successful without clear tailor-made approach? Is there a risk that instead of more for more approach, we will in fact get less for more policy? With those questions in mind, I would like to pass the floor to a co-organizer of today's event, one of the biggest promoter of Eastern Partnership ambitious agenda for associated trio, which is Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, a member of European Parliament, Andrius Kubilius. Mr. Kubilius, what message did you bring us today?
Okay, yeah. Thanks a lot, Alyona, and really very happy to see all of you, friends, both from Brussels and from Kiev. Yes, with our Eastern Neighborhood East Forum, we are co-organizers of this event, and I think that this is a very important event exactly in a very good time, because just recently we had Western Balkans Summit, and we're coming to Eastern Partnership Summit. And I would be very happy to hear, answers from Ukrainians, what is, in their view, what is an ambitious post-2020 agenda. But I'm always worrying that, on our side, on the EU side, we also need to ask ourselves a very simple question: what is our, ambitious post-2020 agenda? And exactly when I see, Western Balkans as really very big success of EU geopolitical, developments, with really very clear language, which I always was praising when I was listening to either Commission President or Vice President for Foreign and Security Policy for Ursula von der Leyen or Mr. Borrell, when they were speaking in a very clear way that if EU is not coming into Western Balkans, then either Russia or even maybe China or even Turkey can destabilize Western Balkans. So when I'm looking into Eastern Partnership region, I see that Russia really is very successful in destabilizing, at least in attempting to destabilize, the whole region. Luckily, Ukrainians are very good to defend themselves. But I do not see very clear, EU strategy, how not to allow to destabilize really the region. What is EU strategy? So, and that is why I am trying to see possibilities, what we can do now. Still, Eastern Partnership Summit maybe will have declaration. We shall discuss next week in AFET, in European Parliament, report on Eastern Partnership future. We had communication from Commission. We had Foreign Affairs Council decision on Eastern Partnership future. Some of those documents, well, I'm not so happy because maybe I have too large a dream to see much more ambitions. But things are not ending with forthcoming Eastern Partnership Summit. At least I would urge to look into next decade, both from Ukrainian side, what kind of ambition Ukraine has, and what kind of ambition we need to have on EU side. How to make really more for more, but not more of the same all the time. Even, as Alona have said in a very proper way, not more of downgrading. So that's my vision, my view, and I see really major goal for us,